Welcome to Career Tools. This week, meeting preparation questions. The questions this cast answers are: how do I know what preparation I need to do for a meeting? What questions will tell me most about meetings? And why should I prepare for meetings? Have you ever wondered what your manager was thinking when they made some decision or another that seemed crazy to you? When you became a manager, did you think, oh my gosh, I now realize why they made those decisions, and it all became clear? That happened to me too. And now, if you're a manager, probably the execs are a mystery to you. But there's a way to understand them, and that's to get the new Executive Tools podcast and listen to what they're going through, what they're thinking, and what they should be doing. It's a way to find out how to understand the people who make decisions that affect your life without actually asking them. To get the Executive Tools podcast, you'll need to be a personal licensee. So go to the Manager Tools website, look for products in the menu bar, and choose personal license from the dropdown. This is a new chapter, as it were, in Career Tools podcast, because this week I have Andrew with me. So Andrew has been with Manager Tools for a whole 6 months, and already he's on the podcast. So that just tells you how good he is. If you believe the internet or the press or anybody who reports, or discusses with you over a pint their work life, meetings are the bane of everybody's existence. We're all double booked, triple booked, quadruple booked if we're really important, and never have time to do our actual work. People say, oh, I'm always in meetings. I never have time to do my work. And most people say that meetings are ineffective, that actually the end of any meeting is just an agreement that these people should meet again for another meeting. It's ridiculous. And whether or not that's true for you, there are ways to make meetings more effective. Even if you're not leading the meeting, there's ways to make it more effective for you and to present yourself in the best light. And one of the things that you need to do in order to get to that point is to accept the meeting invitation and then think through the 4 questions that we're going to cover in this guidance.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Wendy. Also, as a note, and maybe it's not worth mentioning, but as we talk about meetings and how prevalent they are, I also thought, I've been on projects where people are specifically assigned just to handle all the meetings that have to happen. That's their only job, is arranging and coordinating
meeting coordination.
Yeah.
I've been in positions where finding a room for a meeting was a full-time job. Because there weren't enough conference rooms. So, yeah.
Exactly. All right. So today's outline is the 4 questions we're going to ask is: who is going to be there? Why is this meeting being held? What is the timing of this meeting? And what is the objective? And
we're generally talking here about meetings where there's a non-descriptive meeting title, no agenda, it's not a standing meeting. We're talking about meetings where you get the invite and you don't know what it's about. If you're in the middle of a project, generally you know what the meetings are. There's a drumbeat or there's an issue and you know about it, and the issue is in the meeting title. But these are those meetings that you get that are kind of vague sometimes, and these questions will help you work out what's going on and then decide how to prepare yourself. And part of the reason I wrote this is because when I was 21 or 22, I worked for an amazing manager, and I had a meeting on my calendar, and she said, "What's that meeting?" And I said, "Oh, these people invited me to the meeting." And she said, "So why are you going?" And I said, "Because they invited me." And she said, "That's not a good enough reason to go to a meeting. Why are you going?" And then she made me step through these kind of questions, and I had a whole new appreciation for meetings ever since. So now I'm going to share it with everybody else.
So the first question is, who is at the meeting? But we don't know that until we look. And the good thing about the current, use of scheduling systems and Outlook and Google is that you can see who else has been invited to the meeting, and you can see whether they've accepted or not. So it's a really easy question to answer.
Except that the importance is not in the list of names.
Right, exactly. The who question tells you how important the meeting is, it tells you what the atmosphere is going to be like, and it gives you a clue about how you should behave. And this is best demonstrated by example. Let's say you're on a software project as a developer. You receive an invite to a meeting entitled Project Meeting.
It tells you nothing.
Well, yeah, what does that mean? So we're going to give you 3 scenarios about who is invited and then tell you what conclusions you could draw in that situation.
So the first scenario is the invitees are your boss, the rest of the developers, your boss's equivalent on the QA team, and the QA team members.
Yeah, the invitees to this meeting suggest that there's a need for either direction or coordination or both between the development team and the QA team. If it were at the beginning of a project, it might be a meeting about the way development and QA are going to work together for the life of the project, kind of a level setting meeting. There's no drama here. It's a normal, everyday project meeting. If it's in the middle of a project and you know there's been friction between the QA team or with the QA team, then the fact that all the developers and all of QA are invited suggests that this meeting is serious. The QA manager and your manager are coordinating in order to reset expectations, and you're going to be told how to work.
Yeah. A meeting between 2 departments, especially, and we should have said this, QA stands for quality assurance. And so developers develop software, and then quality assurance make sure it works or make sure it does what it should be doing. And the fact that those 2 teams are having friction and they're all being moved into one room suggests that somebody is about to lay down the law and tell you how you're going to work, because what you're doing right now is causing friction, and that's a bad thing on a project. The more benign the meeting invitation title, the more likely it is that the meeting is going to be contentious. If the meeting's a brainstorm, a team building, a best practices type meeting, or a celebration meeting, or a meeting to praise somebody, or a standing team meeting, the weekly update meeting, those are all meetings which will have those specifics in the title, because the meeting invite is a kind of warning order, and it's a kind of advance notice of what's about to happen. Anytime that people are not giving you the specifics about what's about to happen means that they're not hiding something that's too much, but they're not inviting thought about it. They're just trying to slide it under the radar a little bit.
Yeah, I think of it as a way of controlling the message, right?
Yes.
Getting little out there so that I can control the message when we're in the meeting. And I think that's a consistent thread throughout this cast, is that if it's good news, it's just thrown out there. It's in the title of the meeting, or it's not even a meeting at all, right? So we're going to tell you that to be a little skeptical, right? Professional skepticism works well with meetings because, you hope for the best, but plan for the worst. And, if it's good news, there's not a lot of thought that's put into it, because if someone is caught off guard or caught by surprise getting good news, it's fine. That's why we tell people to practice giving feedback and rolling out positive feedback first, because if it's good, they'll handle it well. It doesn't matter, the delivery method, but specifically for meetings, if it's ambiguous or, intentionally vague, that's a sign. That's something to be a little cautious of.
Yeah, they're trying not to borrow trouble by signaling that something's about to happen. So exactly. Scenario 2, same meeting title. It just says project meeting. And the invitees are your boss, all of your peers, your boss's boss, all his directs, i.e. your boss's peers, and all of their directs, including the QA team. So this is a big meeting with a lot of people. And the more people that are invited to a meeting, you can know, the more serious it is. You've probably seen those meeting clocks. You can find them on the internet, and you put in the salaries of all the people in the meeting, and it tells you how much per minute the meeting is costing. The more people that are in that room, the more that meeting is costing. And so the return on that meeting has to be high. It either has to be a dramatic change in behavior, or it's at the end of a project, or it's the kickoff of a project that's a lot of revenue for the company or very significant for the company. So more people usually means it's more serious, or at least it has more impact. A big celebration meeting is not serious, but it has more impact. The more people in the meeting, the more investment the company is making, and therefore the return has to be bigger.
Absolutely. Yeah, meetings with swaths of the organization like this are often bad news. The fact that the company wants everyone to hear something at the same time usually means that there is news that needs to be carefully communicated and controlled. We don't usually treat good news that way. If this meeting were the end of a year or end of the year blowout pizza afternoon, which would have the same invitees, it would probably be named End of the Year Blowout Pizza Afternoon.
Yeah, right.
It wouldn't be a surprise. If this meeting has been on the calendar for months, then it's probably just a status update. The longer the warning about a meeting, the more likely it is to be benign. We'll get to that in a minute.
So scenario 3, same meeting, project meeting. But this time the invitees are your boss, his boss, his boss's boss, and a senior person from sales. And you could be fooled here because this is a short list of people. And we just said the more people that are being invited, the more serious it is or the more impact it's going to have. But actually, if you think about it, there's fewer people here, but they are very highly paid. And so the fact that these people are in the meeting still means it's serious, significant, has impact.
Yeah, going back to that salary calculator thing, right? I mean, you could have half the number of people in the meeting, but twice the number of salary depending on the salaries.
Easily, right?
Easily.
Yeah. And the fact that sales is invited probably means the customer is involved in some way. Our first thought would be that somehow, since you're a developer, that development is not producing what the salesperson promised the customer or what the customer thinks the salesperson promised. Sales obviously considers this a big deal because otherwise they would not have escalated the issue to 3 levels from where you are. The fact that there's 3 levels, 4 levels in this meeting is really significant. And if you're invited to a meeting like this, be prepared to defend your work and have a really thorough understanding of what can and cannot be done. The reason you're in the room with these people is to be the subject matter expert. It's to be the person who can explain exactly what's going on, exactly what can be done, and exactly what should be done at a level of detail that can help these other people make decisions. And when I say defend your work, that doesn't mean you go into the meeting ready to say, well, I did it this way because so-and-so told me, in that kind of really defensive way. When I mean by defend your work, I mean be able to explain what you did in a cool, calm, collected way, but say, okay, we decided to do this module because of X, Y, and Z, and it fits what the requirements were by this way. Now, it's entirely possible that those other people in the meeting will turn around to you and say, that was a bad decision. We're not going to do that. That doesn't fit the requirements. There's a new plan. And if you're an individual contributor, that can feel like, oh, the weight of this project is on me and I made a mistake. But that's not what's happening usually, because a project is bigger than just you. You're there as the expert, not as the scapegoat, usually. And in some cases, you will be treated like the scapegoat, and that's a bad place to work. So get your resume ready. Yeah.
Well, Wendy, I also read it kind of like this, is that you do need to be able to defend your work, of course, but also I would imagine in this type of meeting, so let's assume that there's a breakdown here. Mm-hmm. There's some sort of breakdown has happened. Sales is going to want to do as little damage control as possible, meaning that you also need to be a little defensive in terms of knowing what your bandwidth is and what you can take on, what additional work you can do, because the answer may be, well, we can make this really easy on the customer or on the customer relationship if you just take on doing a ton more work to kind of, put the Band-Aid on this. And so I think that's another kind of defense. Don't be defensive. Know what you did, be able to support your decisions, but also know where you're at, what your capability is, what your bandwidth is like, so that you can not overcommit to a solution potentially.
Yeah. And the good thing about having such senior people in a meeting like this is they can make decisions and they can say, right, this customer is important enough that this is the only thing you're going to do for the next week. And we'll find other people to do the rest of your work. And they can make that decision and make it happen for you, which is great.
Yeah, that's a good point.
So every time you get a meeting invitation, look at the invitee list carefully and then look at who's actually accepted the invitation. And once you know who's going to be there, think it through. Why would this group of people have been invited? What are the possible topics? Is it going to be a positive or a negative meeting?
And again, I would say hope for the best, but prepare for the worst.
Absolutely.
Because, you don't want to be caught flat-footed.
I said before that the one thing that was the biggest change in my career was learning about DISC and how other people thought differently from me, and that their motivations weren't there just to wind me up, but that they actually had reasons for the things they do. And now you can learn all that in just 4.5 hours. So half a day, and you can change your entire work life for the rest of your life. We are teaching our Effective Communicator Conference virtually on August the 26th. It's just 4.5 hours. To find out more, go to the website, look for training, and choose Virtual Effective Communicator Conference from the dropdown.
So the next question we ask is, why is this meeting being held? As Wendy mentioned, meetings cost money. Meetings should not be called if another cheaper method of communication would work. We've all seen that meme, right? That says, this all could have been an email, or I survived a meeting that could have been an email. And the person who called the meeting chose to communicate with all of the attendees together at the same time. Why, right? You have to ask yourself why. And here are some reasons which could either stand alone or could be combined with one another as a purpose for the meeting. So the first why could be explanation. Something complicated needs to be explained, and therefore synchronous questions and answers are required. Could be cooperation. There's a need for 2 or more people to work together more than usual or on something unique or different. Coordination. The work needs to be done in a certain order. Orientation. The work requires a baseline of knowledge for more than one person. Contention. A situation that will cause conflict needs to be discussed. And celebration. Celebration because, you can't really celebrate on your own, right? The celebration is, by definition, with other people.
Yes, exactly. And so those are just some of the reasons, but there's got to be a reason why someone decided to put people together in a room rather than sending email. And we'll get to, in a minute, objectives, which is different from why is this meeting being held. And if you're thinking right now, I know why this person called a meeting, because they want to, because they're able to, and they want to exercise that ability, that's possibly a reason, but we'll get to that in a second. That's different from why, or at least the spoken why for a meeting.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Next question, what's the timing of this meeting? So the less notice you have about a meeting, the more likely it is that it's being caused for a negative reason. If you are told to clear your calendar for a meeting in less than 24 hours, it's something big.
That's big.
And it's bad.
Yeah.
And it doesn't matter whether it's you and your manager or it's the entire company, it's not good. And in some places where the speed of the op tempo is fast enough, then maybe 24 hours is too long. Actually, 24 hours is, a standard meeting. That's how long meetings generally, that's the runway that meetings generally have in your team. But for most people, that 24-hour rule will work.
But again, if that was good news, that would be communicated differently.
Yes,
right?
Exactly.
It wouldn't be
clear your
meeting.
Calendar.
Yeah, totally. Meetings that are more than a week away are generally benign. Meetings between 24 hours and a week are the hardest to judge because the duration between the meeting invite and when the meeting takes place depends on the company, your team, that particular, manager's norms, could even be their their DISC profile.
Right.
What they register as important enough to call a meeting for could be completely dependent on their communication style. So pay attention to what usually happens, and you'll get a sense for what timing means where you are. You could work in an organization where, more power to you. I feel bad for you, but you could work in an organization where that's common, that it happens quite a bit. And you may need to, temper your skepticism a little bit, because that's just how your op tempo is. I hope not, but if that's the case, then that's the case. But you'll get a better sense of the internal workings of your organization by being aware, being cognizant of that, and kind of going from there.
Yeah. All you need to do is pay attention for 2 weeks and you'll know.
Yeah.
It only takes that long. And most of us just go through the day and we don't think about those things. But the moment you start taking notice, you'll find there's a ton of information based on how long you get in preparation for any one meeting.
Yeah, it's interesting how much data you could really compile or glean from, we all get those meeting invites and we don't get to them, or we check our email 3 times a day like we should be doing. And we look and we see, oh, somebody sent out a meeting request, then it got canceled. Then a different meeting got rescheduled at the same time with similar invitees, but now so-and-so is also. And so you can get some really good working knowledge just from being observant and paying attention. And rather than just deleting those, actually looking and seeing, oh, who was on that?
Yeah, right? And it will take you 3 seconds. And
3 seconds.
Yeah. So the last question is, what is the objective? And this is where we get to that why question in a very different way. So there are 3 types of objectives in any meeting. There's the spoken objective, the unspoken objective, and your objective. So the spoken objective is the one that's either in the meeting invitation, or it's what you're told if you ask what the meeting's about. So somebody will say it's a briefing, a status update. It's to discuss the way forward. It's to resolve an issue. It's to coordinate a response. It's to get us all on the same page. It's to kick off a meeting. It's the thing that is being broadcast about that meeting.
Yeah. And the unspoken objective is just as important. And the one that answers to the previous questions will help you discern. We have some examples for you next, but these aren't the only unspoken objectives that go with these scenarios. Take into account all the information you have, along with your company and manager's norms, like we've mentioned. Don't jump to conclusions. We're going to give you a negative example here, but don't jump to conclusions just because we've provided a negative example.
So the first example is a briefing. So that's the spoken objective. You're told it's a briefing. It's the entire company and it's short notice. The unspoken objective is communicating bad news. It's layoffs, a significant project issue, or the loss of a significant customer. The fact that it's short notice, there's a lot of people in it, means it's something significant. And generally, because it's short notice and they're controlling the message, it's bad news.
Yeah, absolutely. Another example is a meeting that's a briefing. It's a briefing with your team. It's called by your manager, and it's a week from now. Now, the unspoken objective here is this is just an update and level set. Again, going back to the timing. And your manager just doesn't want to say the same thing 5 times.
If it was urgent, if it was important, it would be shorter notice.
Yep.
The next one is a meeting that's been called, or the spoken objective is resolving an issue, and it's in a month, and HR is invited. Now, the unspoken objective is, for example, the communication of a systemic employee issue with legal ramifications. The fact that it's resolving an issue, but we're not going to talk about it for a month, means it's not something that needs fixing or can be fixed right away. If it was a meeting to resolve an issue with HR and it was in 3 hours, someone is about to be fired.
Yeah.
That because of the, someone's done something bad enough that it needs an urgent meeting. But because it's a month out, there's a lot of thinking that's going into that meeting, which suggests it's something more systemic. And the fact that HR are there means it's something to do with employees.
And I would just add, I've worked in HR. I have a little bit of an HR background. So I will tell you that HR folks are very quick to raise the level of urgency. They don't hesitate to raise the level of urgency, especially when it comes to employees. And so the fact that it has HR involved and it's a month out, couple those things together, it's not pressing. I mean, that it's very, very clear that that's not pressing, because anyone who's been in some meetings with HR, and I've been on both sides of those meetings, HR folks have no problem calling a meeting and saying it's urgent and we need to get to it quickly, even if it could wait.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, so the next one is a meeting where the spoken objective is resolving an issue, but it's tomorrow, and a peer in a team you work with is invited. And the unspoken objective is it's probably nothing big, because if it were, more senior people would be invited. The fact that it's you and your peer and maybe your managers probably means it's not that big a deal. There's only 4 of you. It's not high level. And it's probably something standing in the way of her work. Because if it was something really problematic, like some huge mistake had been made, it would be today, you know?
Yeah.
The fact that it's tomorrow means it's something fairly significant in the sense of holding up progress, because otherwise they'd leave it for a week. And part of the reason that timing makes a difference is the shorter the notice, the harder it is to bring those people together. The more, if you try and set a meeting for tomorrow with 4 people, the likelihood of you finding a half hour that suits them all on their calendars is low. And so if the meeting is tomorrow, then it's probably more important. So it's probably not some huge deal, but it is something where there's something between your team and their team, and it's stopping her from doing her work. And probably it's going to be like, her manager's going to explain, this is what's happening, this is how it's causing a problem. And you're going to go, oh my gosh, I never even realized that was a problem. I can fix that.
Yeah. Now, I just love this cast, but this part for me was, as soon as I read it, I was like, oh yeah, that's good. You think of it, but you don't articulate it. So once you know the spoken objective and you're sure as you can be about the unspoken objective, now it's time for the third type, your objective. Being invited to a meeting is reason enough to go. Not if you work for Wendy's boss when she was 21, but it's enough reason to go, especially if the invite is from your boss or someone higher ranking in the organization. You can use that time more fully, though. Professionals know to use these meetings to further their own objectives. This sounds a little Machiavellian, but it need not be, as we'll demonstrate here in a minute. So let's take the same exact examples and add to them.
So the first one was a meeting that was being called a briefing with the entire company on short notice. And we discussed the fact that we thought this was probably layoffs or some significant customer issue. So your objective would be to take careful notes, because this will be important. You already know that, right? And this increases your knowledge. So your objective is increase my knowledge. Make contact with anyone that you know, even if it's just waving across the room. If it's a really big meeting, then there's 100 people in the room, you might only be able to wave to people or shake hands, but that's part of building your network and making contact.
And those opportunities are few and far between in a lot of organizations to get all of those people together at once.
Yeah. And then watch people's reactions to see who knew about this in advance.
Oh, this is good.
Where the power lies.
Yep.
There are people who knew about this meeting and what it was about. And if you watch people's faces, you'll find out who it is. And that tells you about where the power is in an organization. So that's career planning.
Yep. And from my experience being in those meetings, usually those are the people who are trying to look at other people's faces too, because they know they're not worried about their own reaction. They're looking to see other people's reactions. Absolutely. So another example was the briefing with your team called by your manager a week from now. Again, just the update and level set, and your manager doesn't want to say the same thing 5 times. But your objective here is to bring smart questions that will help you be more effective in the next stage of the project. This is just professional effectiveness. This is how to be better at getting things done or be better at your parts of this project. Be early so that you can chit-chat with your teammates. This is about relationship building, right? We talked about results and relationships, and any opportunity you can to find a few minutes to be early, chit chat, build those relationships, really, really important. And then lastly, speak up in support of your manager and colleagues. This is about being a good teammate and being a good direct, right? Making sure that you support your boss.
This is one of those things that people get on their performance review. Be a better team member. And then they don't know what that means. Well, one of the things that means is going to these meetings and speaking up in support of ideas that you think will work.
Absolutely.
Okay, so the next one was resolving an issue in a month with HR invited, where we said that was probably a systemic employee issue. So your objective in this meeting, again, is take careful notes because it's important. And that, again, is increasing knowledge. And the other objective is don't react in the meeting, because this could be something that you don't want to hear. And practicing not reacting in meetings is it's a sign of professionalism that you don't react in meetings, or at least that you don't react negatively. And these kind of meetings are opportunities to practice that. And it takes as much practice to not react as it does to do any of the other things that you do well. And so it can be an objective of yours in this kind of meeting. I'm going to practice not reacting or not reacting negatively.
Yeah. The other example we had was resolving an issue, that meeting that's scheduled for tomorrow, the next day, with a peer in a team that you work with. Again, probably nothing big, but something maybe standing in the way of their work. Your objective here is to resolve the issue, but also to build the relationship, right? Build your relationship with that person.
Because next time you want them to come straight to you. You don't want them to have to call a meeting with their manager and your manager.
Yeah, which is about preventing future issues, right? We want to make sure they know, hey, the door's open. If something comes up, let me know. And the best way to do that is to tell them, but also fix the issue, right? Competence. You have to show that you will actually do what you say you're going to do. Yeah.
So once you have your objectives, just remember to pre-wire the meeting, even if you're not presenting. So if you haven't heard the podcast about pre-wiring, pre-wiring is about communicating about the contents of a meeting before the meeting. If you're doing a presentation, it's about showing all of the participants, all the people that are able to make a decision about whatever it is you're presenting, showing them the presentation ahead of time, making changes so that when you go into the meeting, you know that all the people that you want to agree with your proposal are going to agree. So you don't go into those meetings and then have to justify, and it turns into a nightmare. So if there's a meeting but you're not presenting, but for example, you want to ask smart questions, you might tell a peer what you're going to ask and get their feedback. If there's somebody more senior in your team that you can go to and say, hey, I was thinking about asking this during this meeting. Do you think that's an appropriate time? I am one of those people that speaks without thinking. With my dad, it says, engage brain before opening mouth. I don't do that. And there has been times when I've been in meetings and asked a perfectly reasonable question, but not in front of the people that were in that meeting. I just threw someone under the bus, or I pointed out some kind of error, or I just made someone else look bad by asking the wrong question. So having somebody to ask is great. And also, if they agree that that's a smart question beforehand, then in the meeting, they'll go, oh, yeah, that's a good question. Because they've told you to ask it. And so they're going to support it out loud. And so that makes you look good.
Absolutely. I mean, and it could be for one of those, short notice, all company briefings. It could be just agreeing to meet up with someone that have a good relationship with after the meeting to compare notes. Hey, is this the same takeaway you got from that meeting?
Yeah. What do you think that means for our careers? Like, do you think we should jump ship?
Right, exactly. Yeah, totally. So not every meeting will benefit from pre-wiring, but almost certainly more than you are thinking of or actually doing now would benefit from pre-wiring.
There are some people who seem to have a sixth sense when it comes to meetings. They know just how to prepare. They know to ask the right questions. They react in the right way. They get their own way every single time. And when I was in those meetings, when I was 21, 22, I was like, how does she do that? Well, like everything, you can break it down. It's a skill and you can learn it. You just have to do the work to do it. And asking the questions that we gave you here and thinking through some of these scenarios and what they would be like in your company will help you be that person next time. Thanks, Andrew.
Thanks, Wendy. Great stuff.
That's all for this week. We'll be back next week with a new topic.
Bye, everyone.